did a documentary about that, about the way migrants are getting into the U.S. And you mentioned something in the documentary called Global Compact on Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. Now, what is that? What is that?
So the Global Compact for migration is the agreement that is running most of the border crisis that we're just not being told about. And so the investigation I was doing down there was focused mostly on finding out what the heck is going on. And that was one of the big revelations I came to. Oh, this isn't some random, just happened kind of thing. It's that our own government signed an agreement with the United Nations to make this happen. And so, when I went down to Panama, I gained access to the 4 main migrant camps at the southern border on the Darien Gap. I got access to all 4 of them. And you find that the United Nations just has a massive presence. Like, they have tents there, there's different NGOs there. What happens is people come in, they get off their boats. They have these Indian canoes they use. They're called piraguas. They unload them, they get in line at the big United Nations tent, and they register with the United Nations. And then the whole process is they just bus them country to country. Once they reach the United States, they're then arrested by Border Patrol, which is why if you see a lot of the mainstream media, they say that, hey, arrests are up. What happens is this: they arrest them, they take them to what are called processing facilities. This is between Customs Border Protection and Department of Homeland Security. They process them, they get them registered on the amnesty program, they load them on buses, and then they drop them off on the streets of the US. And they give them a free airplane ticket anywhere they want to go. Like, that's what's actually happening, and it's happening because of the Global Compact for Migration.
So what does it say? Like, why is that causing this?
Well, it's set up. It's set up the process to facilitate what they call, safe and orderly migration, basically. And so it created the infrastructure for it. If you go back to 2016, the original agreement they had on it was a precursor. It was based on a New York program with the United Nations before it was an official compact. And under that program, basically the United Nations Human Rights Commission, Commission on Refugees, they came out and they were talking about it because they were one of the main organizations pushing for it. And the narrative they had was that there were tens of millions of people in the world, mostly in third world countries, who they deemed were either refugees or migrants, because they were latching on the whole idea of global warming, right? To frame these people as climate change migrants. And so they wanted to create a program to facilitate the movement of these individuals, mostly into Western Europe and the United States. And the system they had, again, the precursor was a New York agreement, which eventually evolved into the Global Compact on Migration. And what it does is it sets up funding, it sets up United Nations operations, and they do their work mainly through NGOs, non-governmental organizations. And they run these operations, tents, checkpoints, buses, and so on, to facilitate the movement of people country by country, either into Western Europe, Canada, or the United States, for the most part.
So the argument is that this is happening so the UN is here to make it a safe and orderly process.
That's what they claim. That's what they claim. But if you go into the actual website of the Global Compact, they talk about global equity, and it ties into the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And so it's basically part of this whole global governance system and agenda they're trying to push, which is where you get different interests and different reasonings, country by country, organization by organization, and even individual by individual.
I have a logistical question about this travel that these migrants are going through. So you were in Panama, and there's this infamous part called the Darien Gap that you mentioned, right? So what we're told is that this is really grueling, that people have to walk a week on foot to get through the Darien Gap because there's no transportation through that. Is that still the case if the UN is coming in and facilitating this?
Yeah. So one of the camps I went to was It was an Embera Indian village, and so you have these native Central American uh, camps, basically, right? One of the camps I was at had been converted into one of the processing camps. So the United Nations had a huge presence at this Embera Indian village, and when the migrants or illegal immigrants were coming out of the Darien Gap, that was the first place they were going to, and they were getting registered with the United Nations. There was a big, UN tent and a big line of people, basically. But I went around and I talked to people coming out of the Darien Gap, and I was like, "Well, what is it like? What did you experience?" Every single person I talked to, individual by individual, said they would never do it again. I was told they said there were dead bodies all over the place. Almost every person I talked to had been robbed because there's cartels and gangs that go in there and they rob and they rape and they kill. I talked to a woman. She said that she was with her husband. She had a child. I believe it was the one, yeah. She was walking. They were walking through the gap. They encountered a gang, and these individuals. They were raping a woman. Her husband tried stopping the rape, and these individuals stoned her husband to death in front of her, um, just emphasizing what these people are dealing with. And I mean, so every person I talked to, they said they would never do it again. They said it was absolutely horrific. It was really difficult. It's extremely dangerous, not even because of the gangs, but just because of, like, you have sheer cliffs, especially when it's the rainy season. You have monsoons coming in, people drown, they slip off cliffs. There's narrow walkways that are just muddy. I mean, the place, let's put it this way, that's the only part of the Pan American Highway that does not connect. Right, the Pan American Highway goes all the way from northern Alaska all the way down to the southern tip of South America. The only place it doesn't connect is the Darien Gap. They could bridge it everywhere else, even in Alaska. This is, the Army Corps of Engineers, which built the Panama Canal, and I mean that's like a wonder of just engineering. I mean, the thing is not even like computer run. It's like, it pulls water from nearby lakes, it drains, it's incredible. They could build that, but they couldn't build a bridge through the Darien Gap, just emphasizing how crazy that area is. And so, yeah, what you hear about the Darien Gap is absolutely true. It's extremely, extremely dangerous, and the gangs just make it worse.
Well, and so that seems like that kind of is to the UN's point about how they do need to have a presence to provide medical treatment, to provide care, because there are these horrible things these people are encountering.
Well, I mean, and that's there's two arguments for that, right? One argument is, well, they have the Red Cross. They have Doctors Without Borders. It's some of the camps I went to. They had a presence. I talked to a lot of the migrants coming through. I show what they have to say, and some of them are like, yeah, we go there, they do treat us, but a lot of them say they don't really get what they think they need. Frankly, I had one individual, for example, he had a terrible just skin infection, and he wasn't able to get treatment because they said that he had to get new clothes because they wouldn't treat him otherwise, basically. But he couldn't get new clothes, and so he was kind of stuck. The other argument, though, is, yeah, you could argue that they're helping facilitate and they're making it safer. But the other side of it is that their very presence and them doing this is what is causing people to go by the millions and try to, come to the U.S. That this wasn't really happening, at least nowhere near this scale, until they started up this whole process facilitating it.
When did this compact begin?
Sorry, 2015, 2016. It was right before Trump came into office.